It's a great honor for me to be here at the Empire Club of Canada today, which is arguably the most famous and historically relevant speakers podium to have ever existed in Canada. It has offered its podium to such international luminaries as Winston Churchill, Ronald Reagan, Audrey Hepburn, the Dalai Lama, Indira Gandhi, and closer to home, from Pierre Trudeau to Justin Trudeau. Literally generations of our great nation's leaders, alongside with those of the world's top international diplomats, heads of state, and business and thought leaders.
It is a real honor and a distinct privilege to be invited to speak to the Empire Club of Canada, which has been welcoming international diplomats, leaders in business and in science and in politics. And when they stand at that podium, they speak not only to the entire country, but they can speak to the entire world.
Good afternoon, fellow directors, past presidents, members, and guests. Welcome to the 116th season of the Empire Club of Canada. I'm Mike Van Solen. I'm the president of the Empire Club, and I'm delighted to be your host for today's virtual meeting of the club. Today, we're going to look at COVID-19, its impact on the real estate industry, and what recovery looks like. From my home to yours, I call this meeting to order. We certainly couldn't hold events like this if it was not for our generous sponsors. So I would like to thank our lead event sponsor and presenting partner, KPMG. I would also like to thank our event partner, VVC and livemedia.ca, for webcasting today's event. And I would also like to thank our media partner, the National Post. Around this time of year, a new cohort of consumers would typically be enjoying the spring weather to take in open houses and contemplate the biggest purchase of many of their lives, a new home. But this year, as with so much else, that tradition is now clouded by uncertainty. We know that the pandemic is having a big impact on real estate. The Toronto Real Estate Board just released its numbers for April, which show that sales fell a remarkable 67% this April compared to last year. As we saw in 2008, we know that the real estate sector is very important to our economy. And we also know that sector includes much more than just the residential market. It also includes commercial, industrial, retail, hotels, and more. So what is clear is that the pandemic is going to have a huge impact on the real estate market, which is why we're so happy to bring together an expert panel today to help us better understand. Today, we are joined by John Love. He is the founder and CEO of KingSett Capital. KingSett is a leading private equity real estate investment firm. John was previously the president and CEO of Oxford Properties Group, and he serves on the board of directors of the Chief Executives Organization. He is a member of the Business Council of Canada. In 2018, he was appointed a member of the Order of Canada. We're also pleased to welcome the current president and CEO of Oxford Properties, Michael Turner. Michael leads Oxford's global real estate business with more than $47 billion in assets under management across Canada, the United States, Europe, and Asia. Before becoming president, Michael led Oxford's Canadian business, which includes more than 50 million square feet of property. Rounding out the panel is Sam Coleus. He is the chairman and CEO of Boardwalk REIT. Sam co-founded Boardwalk in 1984 and has been helping lead that organization for now 3 decades. Today, Boardwalk owns more than 30,000 units, housing 55,000 people. Today's conversation will be moderated by Sheila Botting. She is a principal and president of America's Professional Services at Avison Young, and I have no doubt she will be able to draw out some real insights from this August group. Before we get going, one point of housekeeping, there is an opportunity to submit questions. We hope that this will be interactive. On your screen, you should be able to find a tab to send those along. We'll try to get to as many as we can. I hope you'll find this session useful and insightful. So without further ado, let me pass it over to Sheila.
Terrific. Thanks, Mike. And everyone, welcome to an incredible panel session this afternoon. We're thrilled to be able to be in this conversation and for the panelists to welcome us into your homes as you answer and respond to a whole series of questions. Of course, with COVID, we have 61,000 cases in Canada right now, and the unemployment rate is expected to come out this Friday at around 20%. So the impact on our Canadian economy and certainly our communities is prolific. So hearing from our panelists, their views on that will be really important. But first, I'm going to ask the personal question, which is, what is it like for you personally? What is it like for your family? How are you enjoying being in your home offices and, navigating your teams and the opportunities? So I'll turn it over first to John Love to answer that question.
Thank you, Sheila. Well, it goes without saying that we're all in a time of considerable disruption. It was some 47 days ago that my wife and I were on an extended ski vacation in Colorado to be abruptly interrupted with closure of the hill and return to Toronto, where we've been in our apartment ever since. I'm blessed with a great marriage to a great partner, so that works out pretty well. And fortunately, both our kids have houses of their own. So it is a reasonable working environment. I think personally, the thing that I would observe the most is I miss the intense personal interaction and the variety of regular daily life. And I think the variety of our day, or my day, my week, whatever, I perhaps never fully appreciated with regards to what we might do, who we might encounter, and places we might travel to. And so the absence of all of that has really changed how one copes. And so it does require different coping strategies to get through the day and put everything in some perspective.
Okay, thank you. And Michael, you've now come back from New York to Toronto. What is your experience? You have, of course, young children at home as well.
Yeah, thank you, Sheila, and thank you for having me. Yeah, so I've got a 9-year-old, 6-year-old, and 3-year-old. So we are blending the existence of home, school, and work all in the same place. And I'm sure, like many people listening here today, that comes with an enormous number of challenges. Mostly my wife, who's managing, the primary responsibilities on homeschooling, and myself from a work standpoint. And we both decided that we're not very good at homeschooling, and we are, similar to John, looking forward to getting back to normal life and interacting with people. So we moved, Sheila, probably around the same time that John was experiencing a shutdown of ski hills. We were experiencing the shutdown of our kids' school in New York, and we wondered if this was going to last. We thought something crazy like 2 or 3 weeks. Perhaps we'll want to be in an environment where we have a little more space. So that's in Toronto. So we came north, and we've been here ever since.
Thank you. And Sam, you're in Calgary. Is it any different in Calgary for you?
Well, we're only limited by our imagination. And in Calgary, restaurants, movie theaters, pizza parlors are all open in our 3-year-old granddaughter's imagination in our playtime. So we are very blessed with family, and that's a real bedrock and our true treasure. And the little things are big things, and we're creating some amazing memories with our family and grandchildren. And a couple of our children are in the United States. One of our daughters, who's at Parsons in New York, has stayed in New York, and she is creating videos of New York and her enjoying New York on her own, which is really exceptional experience that it truly is once in a lifetime that somebody will be able to experience something like that. So we are in extraordinary times that are creating extraordinary experiences as well.
Perfect. Thank you. So John, you and I have had so many conversations about the office and the workplace. What's it really like leading a team from your home office with everybody in different locations? What's that experience like? How are you running the business? How are the teams working? What are the pros and the cons to your experience there?
So the first thing I observed with, we've got 120 people in the KingSet level, working remotely and independently. And so there's the first thing I try to do is connect people, make people belong. So every morning before 7 a.m., I send out an email to our whole staff talking about what's going on in the business, what went on yesterday, perhaps what's going on today, issues we're facing, opportunities, challenges, as well as giving some commentary on what I see as the outlook. One of the great challenges we all have is that in this time of isolation and uncertainty, there is so many prognostications being made by all sorts of people that can really take you in all sorts of destabilizing directions. And so it's important that I, try to put a coherent message on the fact that, our business is sound, our strategy is sound. This is a health crisis. We will get through it. And so I start off with my morning email. I have 8:30's executive committee. And then the rest of the day is spent by all sorts of different people doing what they regularly do. We've done the best we can to, coordinate by Zoom, and there's been Zoom pizza lunches and so on and so forth. And so all of that moves ahead. But this way of working is like holding your breath. And you do have a certain amount of time that you can hold your breath. And the video technology and so on has enabled us to hold our breath longer. But at the end of the day, you can't really build, run, and operate a business, 2D. You need to be live.
Thank you. So, Michael, you're doing the same thing, but for a global platform. So I can imagine the dynamics in London or New York or other locations could be very different. How are you managing?
Well, to some extent, Sheila, that footprint that we have set me up to be able to manage this way, because I am accustomed to calling people in the morning in Asia and again at night in Asia and the Americas and Europe in between. And the leaders of our business are distributed in different continents. So I am accustomed to connecting with my leadership team remotely. So that hasn't been a huge adjustment. I would say for people who didn't believe in collaboration and some of these tools that we're all using right now, I think that they've gotten on the wagon, if you will. Otherwise, it's extremely lonely and they're not able to be very productive. So that's been an enabler for us. And I would agree with John. I mean, there's only so much that you can do in this kind of a forum. It's wonderful that we're able to connect with all of the participants on today's conversation, but I cannot replace it with, in-person contact, just like I can't replace time with my family on, FaceTime. I actually have to be there with them. And so I like John's analogy. We're holding our breath. At some point, we need to get back on with it. And I was thinking about this the other day. The way that society is managing the current state of this pandemic is they've shut down the parts of our lives of where people live, shop, work, and play. And we're in the business of providing people space and services where they live, work, shop, and play. And those collision amongst people is how we engage and we express our humanity and we get the creative process going instead of the anxious process going. And I think all of us are at this point very much looking forward to putting one foot in front of the other and moving on with rebuilding. That's great. Thank you. And Sam, over to you. How are you managing what you're doing from home and what are the issues that you see in kind of the process and how we're getting together?
Well, we're an essential service, so we're still at our sites and work alongside with our teams. And we always strive to stay true to our core values of family. We're always with our family. Our golden rule is our compass, our purpose, bringing everybody home to a safe and happy place to call home, where love always lives. What is more important than being part of a loving family. Our actions that we've taken are several: huge focus on communications and an awareness campaign, and focus to educate, moved very quickly and formed a response committee. And working from our home, we've, where possible, enabled. We've gone through in Alberta floods, fires, and even in Fort McMurray recently, a flood and a pandemic combination. And so all these experience has in the past enabled our emergency response plan. And it's true, the saying, what doesn't kill us make us stronger. And so we've always taken a safety first approach, and that has been exemplified by our quick response to plexiglass, PPE rollout. We bought PPE equipment really early. Just listening to the international stories prompted our acquisition of PPE equipment. We took on testing very early. One of our, for example, associates came back from Italy, and we asked our associate to go get tested about a month and a half ago, before there was self-quarantining and this requirement. And our healthcare was very cooperative, tested our associate. He was positive. He stayed at home for 2 weeks with 0 symptoms and got tested again negative. And that's a good example of how we like to take our safety very, very serious. And it's always top priority. We launched a partnership and a virtual connection with our residents with YooHoo, which has helped us increase our communication with our residents and connect everybody virtually. Our marketing team put together an elaborate website, bwalk.info, all things COVID, and helped with all the resources that are available by all levels of government. And we've increased our virtual showings. Some of the outcomes we've seen, our teams are feeling a lot more supported because of the actions we've taken. Our retention is higher than it's ever been. Move-outs have dropped. And our net promoter scores, the way we calculate and measure resident satisfaction, is at its all-time highest. Our residents are really rising to the occasion because residents are recognizing the heroic efforts of our team, cleaners, landscapers, our whole team. We're all cleaners, and all hands on deck is having an amazing positive effect on our resident satisfaction. Our take-up online connections with YooHoo is approximately 60% and growing daily. And our deferral program that we announced is under 2%. And most have paid and continue to make payments. And that seems to be dropping, giving the accessibility and the great job our governments are doing, providing access to the resources that are being used and are having a positive effect with our residents and our community. Our inspiration continues to be our associates and our residents continue to pour in. Last Friday, I'll conclude by sharing one of our residents' feedback. The hardest score to get is on a move out. And here's a resident on a move out. I will dearly miss being part of Boardwalk's family. Thank you so much for making me feel at home. I love each and every member working for Boardwalk. Again, I thank you. It's pretty powerful words from our resident.
That's huge. Thank you. So I'm going to continue on the residential theme, the places where we live. John, for you, you've of course got a number of projects, both existing communities and new communities that you're considering. What do you see as the impact? What are you facing today? What do you see in the future as part of the way we may recalibrate our residential communities?
Well, I think, we are put in place a high touch. I mean, sort of as Sam talked about when his family relative just moved out. We're talking about a high touch, high contact environment because people want to know what you're doing in the building. And, we've got a Live Safe program where we're communicating to our tenants and prospective tenants the hygiene and other biosensitive things that we're doing to make the building safe. And I think that'll be important on an ongoing basis. As to new design, it'll be interesting to see more creative solutions that give the option of working at home, so more focus on how one does that to the extent that one wants to do that. In addition, the leasing concept is changing. For sure, we're having lower turnover today because, of course, people are less reluctant to move. We're also having much higher retention rates from people that do a video tour or actually do a physical tour. So your closing percentage is much higher. But these are kind of interim things. In the long run, I think that good rental product with great managers, such as what Sam's doing and hopefully what we're doing, will distinguish ourselves in the marketplace. Thank you. Michael, over to you on the residential side. And I should say, including what Michael's doing.
So we own a couple of residential businesses, one in the UK called Get Living. It's a platform in London. And I was thinking as I was listening to others speak about some videos that I've seen where every night at around 7 p.m., all the residences in one community come out onto the balconies and they clap and bang pots and pans in recognition of all of the healthcare workers that live also in that community. And those are really inspiring moments for all of us. So I wouldn't have a ton new to offer. We've done the same kinds of things, whether they be in Canada or the US or in the UK, in terms of virtual tours and using digital tools to both manage and lease space. I do have a bit of a worry longer term. And what's been fascinating to me is I haven't heard anybody on the telephone or the television or a screen like this say, I'm not paying my internet bill. And a lot of people have said, I'm not paying my rent, or policymakers trying to help their constituents, which we all need to work with and assist people, have said, you don't need to pay rent. And I'm worrying about the long-term implications of governments who are going to experience a lot of stress from all the debt they're taking on and the demands from people, many of whom will have lost their jobs, and the long-term implications of some of these policy changes, which some may become permanent, and how that over time exacerbates the housing shortage that we have to give people affordability and choice. So we have a tracking program right now where we're tracking government edicts around the world because they have an implication on us, and we have to assess them and understand, is this good for us? Is this bad for us? Do we need to make any decisions? And how do we operationalize these? And they happen at the city, state, or provincial and federal level. And I think as of yesterday, there were 143 different edicts from governments around the world that changed how we operate in the last few weeks as compared to previously. And I'm not talking about health and safety related matters. I'm talking about those that are more fundamental in terms of contracts and payments. And so I do worry over time about stroke of the pen risk and the implications that that could have, perhaps unintended, on the willingness of capital to invest and provide affordable housing and choice in communities that need them.
Thank you. So I think the next obvious question, I think probably everybody who's listening to this call will be riveted to your answer on this one, is where are the house prices going? You know, if the Toronto Real Estate Board reported a 60% decline in unit sales, obviously during this issue, of course it's going to happen. One of the banks came out and said there's going to be a 7% increase in values next year in 2021. What's your view on this? You know, do we all just kind of hunker down and hope and pray that our values will go up next year, that life will get back to normal? Will it be a V, will it be a U, or will it be a long protracted increase? John, you're dying to answer that question, I can tell.
I don't think any of us are necessarily involved in or get a great prognosis on single-family home values. But I think if you look at what's been driving home values, it's been job creation and immigration. And, it's simple as supply and demand. And I think where there is supply and demand imbalances, i.e. where demand is greater than supply, I think you'll continue to see prices firm or be appreciation. I mean, there's many parts in this country where, through government policies, there is less demand than others. And in those areas, I think housing prices will continue to be soft. In MTV, Montreal, Toronto, Vancouver, particularly in the center of the cities, I think you'll continue to see strong demand, and I think you'll continue to see price appreciation. Now, nothing tracks quarter to quarter in my mind, but if you think in a bit of a context of a longer term, I mean, what's driving Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver is the creative community, the technology supported by the very strong finance and service sectors of the economy, and I think those will continue to grow. I think Canada, on a global stage, will continue to be, I think will be even more attractive from an immigration perspective. And I think that our healthcare system, our liberal democracy, and the great talent that we have today in this system will continue to grow. Technology will continue to be a dominant growth factor as we look forward. And I think you'll see Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver particularly distinguish themselves in their ability to harvest that. And so with that enhanced job demand, by definition, all real estate asset classes will continue to perform well in those markets.
That's I love John's optimism, and that's why his view and his apartment is much better than mine. But I would say that there'll be a period between here and there, and my own perspective is it's called hardship, it's called recession, it's called job losses, and I think that will impact asset prices and fundamentals between here and the stabilized state.
So of course, I'm going to ask you, when do you anticipate stabilized state? Year away, 2 years away, 6 months? Is that a loaded question? You wait for the economist to ask that?
I mean, I would offer a similar view from John about the pathway we don't know here. So what's in the last crisis we had a financial crisis which diffused into the economy. This time around, we have a health crisis. The financial crisis has been intervened by policymakers, but we still have the compounding and serious knock-on effects of an economy. And I think it'll vary. I was on a call earlier before this one, and Sydney is about to reopen, and Vancouver, I think, is quite similar to Sydney, and it will reopen soon. Other parts of Canada and other parts of the economy, such as the hotels that we own, that's going to take some time. So I think the areas where we have to build confidence for people to come back and the adjustments to get back to normal are greater. That could be a 12 to 24 month haul, in my opinion.
Okay, that's great. Thank you. And Sam, would you like to weigh into that conversation at all?
Well, we, like John, and Michael, focus in on supply and demand, and it's called the law of supply and demand because it's not a theory. And with laws, we can count on laws as being true over and over. The third variable of supply and demand is price. And so what we've seen and we're seeing right now is an increased demand for affordability. And we all realize everybody needs a place to live. And now more than ever in challenging economic times, affordability and price is the third variable we're seeing is really an essential variable right now. We saw that in the global financial crisis, where there was a dip in home prices afterwards, and actually an increase in rentership from home ownership. And so we're currently seeing that because of our average rents in place as of the year end last year, we reported at $1,182. And that's typically for a 2-bedroom unit size. And so there are laws that we can follow and help us to guide us going forward. So we see affordability as being a big factor and variable in this current market for the foreseeable future.
Terrific, thank you. I'm going to pivot over to the office asset class for a minute from, of course, looking at it from an occupier and from an owner's perspective. I've, of course, done a little mini survey, as I'm sure all of you have. Do you like working from home? What is that like? Or do you prefer to be in the office? And I would say that it's a 50-50 mix from those that I speak with, in that 50% of the people value the work-life balance, not working from home full-time, but maybe working from home 2 or 3 days a week, in the office, the balance. Whereas others say, I want to be in the office the 5 days a week, the traditional schedule. That, of course, has affected a lot of the corporate occupiers. They're reducing their footprint, reducing their cost structure, their expenses. They'd like to try to reduce as much as possible. And of course, that will have an effect on the office asset class over time. And I think that it will evolve as we move forward. What are your thoughts on that? And I'll start with John, because I know you have lots of thoughts on that we've talked about.
Well, with respect, you commented on a lot of those suppositions as if they're fact. And I think it's far too early to say how this plays out. I think the most pronounced 2 factors that are at play, one you didn't mention, which is a pushback on densification. So for 20 years, employers have looked at having tighter and tighter and tighter and tighter space. So if you go back 10 or 15 years ago, it would be an average of 200 square feet per person. Today, many employers are designing to 100 square feet per person, sometimes less. And I think that's a trend that will be pushed back on. And you'll see that the design spec will change. Now, part of the reason that they want to have densification is cost containment, but far bigger than cost containment is the ability to have people collaborate and collide and all those sort of concepts that make knowledge workers more productive and more creative, which they do not get through distributed work or working from home. So I think you'll continue to see significant need for employers to have people together to exchange, because there's a reason we've all done this. And you have to remember that office space is only a few percentage points of the cost of a person's total, of an employee's total cost. So it's not the determining factor. What's way more important is the productivity and the creative caliber you're getting out of that person. At the same time, we're seeing that working from home will be more accepted. Now, it works fine when all of us are on the same Zoom call, but if half are in the office and one's not, that's a bit more difficult. But I think it'll be very constructive where on the work-life balance issue, where a parent has got a sick child, the parent can stay at home with the child, still Zoom in and so on, and be productive. So, and I think that will enable a lot more work in a constructive circumstance. But I don't see that there's going to be a major decline in demand. And the employers I've talked to say it's too early to say what their net's going to be. And at the moment, most tenants that I've talked to are saying, we're just going to have to wait and see, which is the right answer, because no one wants to reduce a lease or add a lease or make a 10-year commitment today. You got to see how things play out, because things, I think we also have to remember that 46 days ago, as an example, the Royal York Hotel was sold out. And today, it's not quite sold out. So, things have moved very quickly, and things could move relatively quickly the other side. We're all guilty of taking a linear extrapolation of a trend. And the trend we're talking about is very, very short-lived. And in fact, I don't think that's the way the world's going to evolve. It is going to evolve. The work-at-home experiment has been pretty interesting, and there's going to be some changes. But those that say nobody will ever work again or offices demand, I just don't think that's real world.
Michael, how about you? What are you experiencing? Because of course you experience this around the globe, and sometimes different markets might be more advantageous or ahead of where we are here in Canada. What's your view on this?
I think John is so wise. He says some very thoughtful and intelligent things. And one of the things that he shared, perhaps just in different words, is he called it linear projection. So I'll go back to 9/11. After 9/11, no one was ever going to live in a big American city again and never going to live at the top of a tall building. And so that likely impacted people's anxiety and decision-making for 12 to 24 months after that event. But beyond that, people said, actually, we want the vibrancy of Lower Manhattan back in our lives. And what a wonderful view of Staten Island and the harbor and so on and so forth. So I'm going to rent that floor up there. So I think it's early to talk about the way in which the world is going to change fundamentally. And I also don't dismiss the possibilities. So I was reading something somebody shared with me the other day. I think it was from Tata Consultancy in India. And they have an explicit program now called 25-25, which means they're only going to have 25% of their workforce working from a central office in 2025. Now, they happen to do a certain type of work, Sheila, that enables them to be able to use a home or one of their customers' offices instead of their own offices. And so that probably is as much of a statement about the flexibility of their own business model. But it made me think that perhaps more subtle and maybe more impactful than how much of my people are going to be in this building is the idea that you can have more distributed companies and organizations using a combination of technology and facilities. So too early to tell. I think this will evolve. I try to not speak to the own preferences I might have, which is people just want more and more office space. That helps me. I think there will be some evolution, and I think there'll be some hardening, just like there was mostly in American cities and in Europe around how we harden the perimeter for security. We're going to harden some of the ways in which we interact with each other in space to enable a safe environment. And one of the consequences of that, as John said, is de-densifying. And you can see how you can really pick up a lot of demand for space very quickly as soon as the design standard goes from 100 square feet per person to, say, 175. Like, that's profound. And I completely agree with John's remark. For a typical professional services company, your premises costs are 5 to 7%. Your salaries and benefits are 70% of your total costs. And I can tell you, work, home, school, all in one place, I do not have more time, and my productivity is far lower, far more than the amount of space costs that I've saved by working from home. Okay. So let's see how it goes. It won't be linear.
So I'm going to start going to some of the questions that we've been receiving, and Sam, I think this one is one that you can easily address, and that's from Karen Cisco. She said, how do people maintain social distancing in elevators? And let's extend it beyond elevators. Let's even think about mass transit, buses, GO Train, how we all get to work every day, all of this. How do we worry about social distancing in that kind of world? Because you've had to deal with that in your portfolio.
Most of our communities are walk-ups, so there are many ways to our residents' homes and stairwells of only a couple, 3.5 stories, and so that is a positive. Where we do have elevators, we really have learned patience truly is a virtue, because it's going to take longer to use an elevator and practice social distancing. We so far have a great resident community that understands this and waits longer for an individual cab to ride in. And we're in an elevator the other day, and we're going down, and there were other residents that wanted to come in, and they never did because everybody, again, knock on wood, was respecting social distance. And so it's going to take more time, is what we're learning. And as a result, it's going to take more patience, and patience is called a virtue for a reason. And in this case, it certainly is, to stay safe and be more patient.
I'm going to rapid fire through some of the questions for each one of you and give you one that I've been asked. So Murray from the West Coast asked, are you able to I'll ask this for John. Are you able to share any insights regarding how commercial property lenders may be responding to landlords facing cash crunches? Are you seeing or hearing of any lender flexibility? Given your portfolio, you've probably had to address that.
I would say that, one of the great Canadian business strengths is a powerful, thoughtful, and balanced banking system. And in a crisis, they're dealing with their customers in the same way that the landlords are. Those that have a strategic and thoughtful relationship are being treated very well. And those that have perhaps not behaved the best and perhaps have got an imperfect relationship are having a tougher time. But the Canadian banks are showing great leadership at every point in the compass in working with their business customers, their, all of their various different stakeholders to be thoughtful and reasonable. And to a large degree, it's the same strategy we have. We have no interest in throwing someone out in the street. The vast majority of people that we have that have got a legitimate problem, we're happy to work with. And it is part of the relationship-based business system which we enjoy in Canada.
Thank you. Michael, I'm going to ask you this question from one of our folks. We're talking about the government program on the subsidies, where the programs help commercial tenants, which says the landlords will cover 25%, government will pay 50%, and the tenant pays 25% of the rent. Have you been involved in that program at all, and has it been effective, especially for some of the smaller commercial tenants?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So I'll probably give an unsatisfactory remark. Yes, I've been involved. Yes, I've had armies of accountants, consultants, and lawyers also trying to figure this out. I applaud the government's efforts in trying to provide assistance. And the programs at the moment that we're seeing don't have the completeness of details or clarity for me to give you a clear response, Sheila. I think the essence of the spirit, as John said, about it's in my interest and all of our interests, just as citizens, that as much of society can come back as possible. So we don't want to turn on our assets and have empty assets. That's not in our interests. And we will work with those where our assistance can make a difference for them. For companies that didn't have a viable business model or just have too much debt, no matter what assumptions you make, I think they're going to find themselves in continued difficulty. And I think larger organizations that have strong balance sheets and an ability to weather this, mostly they're behaving well, and I think they'll continue to pay. So the question you asked was specifically about the program that's out. I'm sure ourselves and all other of our colleagues and comparable landlords across the country are going to work with these tools and any others, but I can't specifically comment on the programs because they're kind of unclear exactly how they work at the moment.
Okay. I have a similar vein that one of the fellows, Ian, asked the questions. Considering health and safety issues aside, what public policy or legal changes would you like to see evolving out of this in order to better protect your investments? Are there things from a public policy perspective that could be addressed that would help to protect your occupiers and your investments overall? Or is it too early to even come out with that?
John, you go ahead. I've got an idea, but I'll defer.
Well, I think number one on the agenda has to be healthcare resilience. I mean, one of the fundamental reasons for the shutdown was concern about, COVID-19 overwhelming the health system. We were ill prepared with respirators, with PPE, not enough hospital beds, and so on and so forth. And I think in hindsight or in a postmortem, we'll have to look hard at how, from a public sector perspective, we build national resilience to another biohazard. So does that mean building, conditional healthcare space? Does it mean stockpiling critical equipment? I mean, today, the testing issue is all because we can't get the reactive agents, which is a particular chemical stream which isn't made in Canada, and people are scrambling and competing all over the world to get it. So we'll have to give some thought to how we protect ourselves from that. And I think from a public policy perspective, we'll have to make a collective institutional investment into extra space in our healthcare system so that we're able to absorb this kind of a shock again. Because if we look at what this crisis will cost, if we had sufficient healthcare resilience or expansion or capacity, we wouldn't have had to incur this cost.
Okay, terrific. Thank you. Michael?
Sheila, just to add a slightly different perspective, one deficiency we've all recognized here, I think, Sam, it was you that mentioned you've experienced fires and floods and so on, all these disasters. There clearly is a gap, and I don't know if it's even fillable because it may be too big of a risk, but business interruption insurance assists in the kinds of issues that Sam was describing. There is no business interruption insurance for a pandemic, and in fact, a lot of insurance contracts would explicitly exclude it. I think this will mostly be fought in the courts and both public opinion and in the courts of the United States, where they have a better capacity to build case law through litigation. But that is an area where I think businesses have found that they're exposed. They're just lacking that tool to help them get back on their feet and recover some of the losses here. And it may be uninsurable. It may be, it's too big of a risk. How can anybody underwrite shutting down an economy?
Okay. Ravi's asked a question that, in fact, I've been wondering about the same answer. So on the weekend, I was out for a walk, and as you know, I live in the suburbs of Toronto, and I was out for a walk and ran into one of my former partners who was typically living at King and Bay in a condo, now suddenly has moved out to my suburban community with he and his children to be having more space and not having to worry about elevators and so on. Do you see that as a potential trend, or do you see that as a short-term reaction potentially? Do you see people wanting to move out to have more space rather than the high rises? And along with that, do you see any changes in the millennial apartment sharing arrangements? That's a question from Ravi. Maybe Sam, I'll throw that over to you because it's got a residential spin on it.
Yeah, we are seeing higher interest in lower dense communities, and this will definitely increase that demand simply because safety is paramount, and having space is something that is very expensive in some higher dense urban areas, and less, again, the affordability is a big factor when it comes to space and affordability, and so we are seeing an increased interest in our urban, less urban areas. And Calgary was rated top 5 places to live on the planet, according to The Economist, and there were no other Canadian cities rating that were on the top 5 level, and lifestyle and fresh air and water, clean water, and space is really a luxury, and so we, even before COVID, recognized the benefits of living in a more spacious, less dense area. There's science now with the psychological effects of long commutes and the hours that are spent on commuting, and so this will definitely change the way we look at mass transit, for example. And so being, as Michael and John are already on this, and leaders in this, and creating a live, work, play communities that are really one. And so developments that combine these essential elements are going to be again very attractable versus suburban areas that are isolated or not close to work and recreation and community amenities. So it's kind of a detailed answer, and it really depends on all those factors. John?
So, I mean, Sheila, I think Sam makes a good point, but we have to be careful that we don't, take one trend and say that's the trend. The fact is, all of these trends coexist. I mean, there's a reason. The first time that I personally moved out of the center of the city to a suburban home was in 1955. I was quite young at the time. It's the ordinary course. People do this all the time, and people move the other way all the time. I live in an apartment in downtown Toronto. You couldn't get me out of here with a stick of dynamite. So there's a reason that these downtown cores, there's a reason New York works, because it's just got so much energy. There's a reason downtown Toronto works. It's got so much energy. Now, it's not for everybody, thank God. I lived in Calgary and we loved it. I grew up in Edmonton and I loved that as well. There's no single answer. The thing is that all of these trends will coexist. And the most important thing for people to think about, particularly at the time of uncertainty, is maintain perspective. It was never as good as it seems. It was never as bad as it seems. And it won't change as much as people might suggest to you. And
Thank you. Michael, do you have any perspective on that? You've presumably left the density of New York for Toronto during this event. Any thoughts?
I would agree with John's notion of perspective. I would share anecdotally that, if I think about the parents that my kids go to school with, kids, and I got to know the parents, there is growing anecdotal evidence of people renting a place in Connecticut, or maybe they're going to buy a place in Connecticut. And for the last 5 years, you couldn't give a house away in Connecticut because the Manhattanite would say too big, too much space, too far, like too uncool. And a lot of people are renting places now. The US Census data for some time has shown that, LA and New York City have not been the fastest growing cities in America. Places like Atlanta or Colorado, or like Denver, Las Vegas, places that offered a better value proposition and a little more space have been growing at a rate of 1.5 to 1.75% a year. And the big megalopolises that are more dense and more expensive have been flat to marginally declining. And I think that this doesn't necessarily create a new trend, but it might accelerate around the margin some of what was already occurring. Perhaps it just wasn't as visible.
Okay, that's great. My good friend Nancy asked the question about HVAC systems. So if we're talking about density, then right away you think about, on these cruise ships that manage to spread through HVAC system, is it going to happen in condos or office buildings or even industrial properties, which we haven't had a chance to touch on yet? Do we have to worry about it there? And that's a question for all of you because you manage these giant portfolios. Anything there?
So, we're very active on HVAC in all of our buildings as we speak. There's a perception that downtown Toronto shut down. In fact, we're doing all sorts of things. We're, practicing and we're working with Oxford and some of the other leading landlords, and, the industry's working together on the same issues, which is to figure out how to safely work the elevators and, safely organize tenants inside their premises and so on and so forth. And on HVAC, we've already got what's called MERC 13 filters, which is the same as you have in a hospital. And CO2 air changes are all being monitored. And I think there is a heightened focus on the quality of air and bioresilience, touchless everything. There'll be a whole whole program. And I think certainly I would say for Oxford portfolio and ours, most of those elements are in place. And there are some gaps that most of us have in certain buildings that we're fixing. But we'll be pretty quickly bioresilience will be a key topic and something that we will aggressively communicate with our tenants and other stakeholders.
Okay. Sam, Michael, anything to add to that?
No,
In multifamily communities, we've got Makeup Air, and that's sourced air from the outside. It pressurizes the interior of our communities to a higher pressure than the exterior pressure, creating a negative pressure, and the airflow goes from outside to outside, and that reduces odors, and also it reduces spread of any germs. And so that is a typical configuration of multifamily communities.
Okay. And one of our questions, Jordan asked the question about whether or not this event would affect your investment or your appetite for seniors housing, retirement housing, long-term care, and I'll bolt on hotels to that whole bundling. Will this, event change your perspective toward investment in those asset classes? Anybody's welcome to go first.
If I just simplify decision-making processes for us, it's what does a resilient portfolio look like? And then you have these two things called risk and return. And if the price is right, we might incrementally say, that's not, the risk of permanent loss at that number is very low. I'd like to buy one of those at that price, thank you. So I'm not sure that this event has materially changed those two sectors from my perspective. In the US, you will see enormous class action lawsuits. And I think in Canada, you'll probably see some which will increase your operating costs and maybe make some of those businesses less profitable, and you will just have to price that in accordingly. Clearly, travel is being impacted and how we shop is being impacted, and all of those things, like any other trend, we factor those into our considerations when we design our strategy and when we invest.
John.
I think you can think in terms of there's also a great opportunity here. We're not in the seniors business, but the reality is that some of the seniors operators will now distinguish their ability to operate relative to others, and they will, grab market share and the ability to charge more for their services because they've been on top of these things. While there, many long-term care and seniors homes have been devastated in Ontario, what you don't see is the number that haven't been. And there are a great number that have actually managed themselves very responsibly through this process, and they will end up being winners. On the hotel front, you've got largely the same issues. With the Royal York, we've stayed open. We've got our Rest Safe program where we're giving rooms to COVID-exposed or to frontline healthcare workers. Nobody's COVID. And it's allowed us to perfect our bioresilience and our other strategies in the hotel because we're working our way through this. And we're optimistic that as the market opens up, that the Royal York can distinguish itself in its ability to attract customers, and hopefully a meeting like this, because they can know that they'll go in the Royal York in a safe environment. So while there is risks and downside, there's also upside and opportunities. And we have to always remember going forward that how can we learn from a situation to make our business more resilient, stronger, and that means making the offering for our customer better.
Thank you. And the next add-on to that question is, what about retail? The retail world has changed dramatically with this event. You're seeing a lot of movement between the smaller tenants, larger tenants are sorting out what they want to do. Would you say the same thing about the retail asset class? There's opportunity here as well.
I think retail will obviously be more difficult. It splits into two categories. You've got street front. We'll put the essential services over here. That is what it is. But if you think of traditional retail, street front retail, I think, will come back, faster and easier because people will be comfortable on the street, and stores can manage their own PPE and entrance requirements and so on. Malls would be a little bit more difficult. But again, I think that mall owners that have a forward-thinking strategy as to how they make sure their customers both are safe and perceive themselves as being safe, that those malls will distinguish themselves. And again, the leading owners, which obviously includes Oxford, are in dialogue on how to just do that. And I think that as we go forward, the Canadian industry is very aware of both the risk, but more to the case, its opportunity to create that environment for our Canadian shopper that they want.
Terrific. What I'll do now is we'll start to work on closing remarks, give you each a chance to make some concluding comments, because obviously there's a bunch of topics. We could probably talk all afternoon, with lots of questions and dialogue. We've done it all virtually. It's not necessarily in the same room, although that would be better from a dynamic perspective. Maybe I can turn it over to each of you for, quick 1-2 minute closing remarks. Maybe starting with you, Sam, as you start in Western Canada.
I'm going to end exactly where we started. Stay true and remember our core family values. Carry them forward. The little things are the big things. Stay connected and find better, safer ways to work together. In 2 words, simply love always, and 1 word, family. We are truly one, as we've learned. Sneeze on the other side of the planet affects the entire planet, and so how greater of an example to illustrate how we truly are one.
Thank you. And Michael, from a global perspective, maybe you could wrap some of those comments in as well with your remarks.
Sure. I'm not sure I'll be as becoming or elegant as Sam is, but I've been speaking to my own team in terms of there's 3 phases here. There's the restriction phase, or what I call lockdown. And I think we're all sort of tiring of it and understanding its costs on us from an economics perspective, a health perspective, a psychological perspective. So that's the state we're in now. Then we're moving into the restructuring phase, and we're going to restructure everything. We're going to restructure how we get to work. We're going to restructure leases. We're going to restructure loans. We're going to restructure our operations. And that will define, for those who are able to navigate that, the next opportunity, which is the rebuilding and resurgence phase. So those are the 3 steps we're going through. And where I need to find my energy and get my energy from for my team is for us to really focus on the opportunities that John has described about how do we rebuild and how do we resurge. So how do we provide a better value proposition to our customer? How do we build a better business model? How do we build a more resilient portfolio? How do we look back upon this period and say, we improved our talent? It was a defining moment in Oxford's history. So I'm looking forward to removing the restriction and getting on through restructuring, which will be it will take some energy, and moving to where I get energy into rebuilding. So thank you for letting me share that. Thank you so much. And John?
I close with saying it's important we maintain perspective. This has been a health crisis. We turned the economy off. We're going to turn the economy back on. It's going to take some time. It's going to take some energy, but life will carry on. We live in the best country in the world. We've worked together cooperatively to manage this crisis as best we can. Let's all support each other and support our government leaders who are faced with making very difficult choices. As we move forward, we'll come out of this stronger. It'll take whatever time it takes. It's okay. The fact is, life will continue and we will meet again.
The 3 of you have provided very eloquent commentary during a very tricky and challenging season, but we love the rebuilding resurgence. That's what all of us do in the real estate community. So you're right, let's move on from this on to the next phases. I'm going to turn it over to Mike and to Tom to wrap us up now.
Thanks, Sheila. Sam, John, and Michael, and Sheila, thanks for a very insightful discussion. It was fascinating for me. I'm going to turn it over to Tom Rothfisher from KPMG, our sponsor for today's event, to provide a proper appreciation.
Thanks a lot, Mike. Greatly appreciate that. Thank you, everyone, for a wonderful presentation. Certainly on behalf of the Empire Club of Canada and KPMG Real Estate Practice and everyone that was listening to this call, I really want to extend our sincere thanks to you for sharing your thoughts. We really appreciated you sharing your expertise and insights, not only on what you're experiencing today, but what you expect to experience and what the remainder of the stakeholders in the real estate industry can expect to experience as well. Clearly, there are going to be some challenging times ahead, and it's great that we can count on leaders such as yourselves to help navigate us through these troubled waters. You pointed out some of these challenges, whether it be, the impact that COVID-19 is having on our communities, the long-term implications of policy changes, how we keep our workers, tenants, and customers safe. You talked about maintaining employee engagement and just reacting to a pushback on densification, but more importantly, overcoming the barriers to building confidence and returning our lives to what everyone's calling the new normal. So, look, while the road ahead certainly is not going to be crystal clear, I really appreciate the fact that you've given us a very positive view of the future. And, the confidence not only that we can weather this storm, but that there are opportunities that we can take advantage of. And as you say, to keep our perspective. So really appreciate that. So let me conclude by once again thanking all of our panelists for the time that you spent, your valuable insights. It's really valuable for us as listeners to understand, what leaders in the real estate community are seeing and thinking about, and what you believe lies ahead. So again, thank you for everything. Appreciate that you could spend the time, and want to also thank everyone that joined us today. Hope you found it as interesting as I did. Mike?
Perfect. Thanks, Tom. I appreciate that. Look, the Empire Club has been impacted by COVID, of course, as well. We're doing this event virtually, and before we would have done it in a room. So, but in some ways, the formula is the same, which is to put some really smart people together to talk about issues that are important to our audience. I think we've certainly delivered on that today. As well, on Friday, John mentioned leaders. We do have Ontario's finance minister joining us for a conversation about what recovery will look like in the province of Ontario. That event's taking place Friday at 11. I hope you might also be able to join that. Thanks so much, everybody. This meeting is adjourned.
Thank you.
Thank you.